At 8:07 on Monday morning, Eliza Monroe fell through the private conference room door of Ravello Holdings. At 8:08, 6 men in black suits turned toward her in perfect silence. And at 8:09, the bronze eagle she knocked from its pedestal split across the marble floor, revealing a listening device that had been recording the most dangerous man in New York for 3 months. Eliza stayed on her knees, one heel missing, her resume crushed beneath her palm. No one moved. At the head of the table sat Matteo Ravello, 36, Sicilian, and terrifyingly calm. He wore a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle, his dark eyes fixed on her, as if he could separate truth from lies by looking long enough. The rumors about him had reached even temporary employment agencies. 6 secretaries in 6 weeks. One had cried in the elevator. Another had left her badge on the desk before lunch. The last had refused to explain why she quit. Eliza had promised herself she would survive 7 days. She was already reconsidering that goal. "Who sent you?" Matteo's voice was quiet, but every man in the room straightened. Eliza pushed herself upright, caught her skirt on the chair, and nearly fell again. A broad-shouldered man beside the window reached forward, then stopped when Matteo lifted one finger. Apparently, even acts of kindness required authorization here. Eliza found her shoe beneath the table and slipped it back on. A woman named Nora from Sterling Staffing. Her eyes moved to the broken eagle. A thin wire ran through the eagle's hollow chest, connected to a black transmitter no larger than a coin. Unless intelligence agencies are hiring receptionists for $19 an hour now. The silver-haired man beside Matteo lowered his face, hiding what might have been a smile. Matteo did not. He rose slowly, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "This is not a reception area. I know that now. The sign outside says restricted." Eliza glanced toward the door hanging crooked behind her. "The woman downstairs told me to take the door on the left." Matteo's expression did not change. "There are 2 doors on the left. That feels like a design flaw." Silence returned, heavier. This time, one of the men looked offended on Matteo's behalf. Matteo stepped over the broken bronze and stopped close enough for Eliza to notice a faint scar near his temple. He smelled of cedar, expensive coffee, and the kind of control that made people lower their voices without knowing why. "Did you touch anything before entering?" "Only the door, the floor, that chair, and apparently your surveillance equipment." His gaze dropped to her trembling fingers. "You're frightened." Eliza curled them into her palm. "I'm unemployed. Fear is currently a luxury." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth. Interest. Matteo crouched beside the shattered eagle without taking his eyes from her. "Antonio." The silver-haired man moved forward. "Seal the floor. No calls. No elevators." Eliza's stomach tightened. "Am I being arrested?" Matteo lifted the device between 2 fingers. "That depends on whether you place this." "I didn't." "Everyone says that." "Then hire better people." Antonio coughed into his fist. This time, Matteo noticed. His eyes returned to Eliza, sharp enough to cut through every excuse she had prepared. "You came here for the secretary position?" She nodded once. 7-day trial. No promises. Matteo looked at the listening device, then at the closed faces around the table. Someone inside his organization had been listening. Someone who now knew Eliza had exposed them. "You start today." Eliza blinked. "You believe me?" "No." He placed the device in Antonio's hand. "But whoever planted this may believe you heard something." Matteo turned toward the security monitors as every exit on the floor locked at once. "Keep her where we can see her." Eliza's pulse jumped. That sounds less like employment and more like captivity. Matteo glanced back, his expression unreadable. "Miss Monroe, by walking through that door, you became the safest person in this building." Then his eyes hardened. "And the easiest one to kill." By 10:14 that morning, Eliza had broken 4 of Matteo Ravello's 12 rules and discovered that the most feared man in the building color-coded his calendar. The list had been waiting on her desk beneath a black fountain pen. Do not touch his desk. Do not alter his schedule. Do not enter after 10 at night. Do not bring food onto the executive floor. Rule 12 was underlined twice. Never interrupt a closed-door meeting. Eliza read it, glanced at the conference room door she had already destroyed, and decided the relationship had started poorly. Her temporary desk sat directly outside Matteo's office, positioned beneath a security camera and within sight of 2 armed guards who pretended not to watch her. Antonio placed a tablet beside her elbow. Everything Mr. Ravello requires is there. Eliza scrolled through the calendar. He has a meeting in Manhattan at 2 and another in Boston at 2:30. Antonio remained perfectly still. Correct. Unless the company owns a teleportation device, it isn't. Behind the glass wall, Matteo lifted his eyes from a document. Eliza lowered her voice. Does he schedule impossible things to test people? Sometimes. Does he know that therapy is cheaper? Antonio's mouth tightened, but Matteo's office door opened before he could answer. Miss Monroe. Matteo stood in the doorway, jacket buttoned, expression unreadable. Why is my Boston meeting gone? Eliza turned the tablet toward him. Because you can't travel 200 miles in 30 minutes. The aircraft can. Air traffic won't cooperate. Neither will the weather, and the human body probably shouldn't try. Matteo's gaze held hers long enough to make the guards uncomfortable. You altered my schedule. I repaired it. Without permission. Your permission was unavailable. Your calendar was having a medical emergency. Something almost moved at the corner of Antonio's mouth. Matteo looked at the revised itinerary. The Boston meeting had been moved to video conference. The Manhattan meeting shortened, and a 20-minute lunch block appeared between them. Remove lunch. No. The word escaped before fear could stop it. Matteo's eyes sharpened. Eliza swallowed, then pointed to 3 previous scheduling errors. Hungry people make mistakes. You don't like mistakes. I dislike disobedience more. Then today may be difficult for both of us. He stared at her, and for one reckless second, Eliza noticed he was not merely intimidating. He was striking in a way that felt inconvenient. Dark eyes, controlled posture, a face built for silence rather than smiles. Matteo leaned over her desk to examine the screen. His hand rested beside hers, close enough that warmth gathered between their fingers without contact. Do you always argue with your employer? His voice dropped. Only when he's wrong. Eliza caught the scent of cedar again and forgot how breathing worked. Matteo noticed. His gaze flicked to her lips, then back to her eyes before he straightened and stepped away. Keep the lunch. At noon, Eliza ordered sandwiches for the night staff and accidentally sent a message meant for Antonio to the entire executive group. He needs to eat before he becomes more terrifying. The room went silent when Matteo appeared behind her. He read the message over her shoulder. More terrifying? Eliza slowly turned. There may be room for improvement. Antonio looked away to hide a smile. Matteo's expression stayed cold, but he took the sandwich. By late afternoon, Eliza allowed herself to believe she might survive the first day. Then every monitor on the floor flashed red. Security footage filled the largest screen. A woman wearing Eliza's coat entered the restricted archive at 11:42 a.m. She had Eliza's height and hair, but when she turned toward the camera, the image glitched for half a second. Then Eliza's face appeared over hers. The woman on the screen wore Eliza's face perfectly, but she checked the hallway before entering the archive. Eliza never checked hallways. She usually walked into danger with the confidence of someone who had no idea it was there. That isn't me. Her voice stayed steady, though every guard on the floor had shifted closer. Matteo stood beside the monitor, his expression unreadable. Your badge opened the door. My badge was on my desk. Antonio checked the access log. It left the executive floor at 11:36. Eliza's mind raced backward. Coffee. Reception. The coat she had abandoned after spilling half a cup down the front. The lobby. She pointed at the screen. I left my coat at reception for 10 minutes. My badge was in the pocket. One of the security men folded his arms. Convenient. Eliza enlarged the woman's face. The outline around her jaw blurred whenever she moved, and the reflection in the archive window showed different features. That isn't my face. Someone overlaid it onto the footage. Matteo's eyes moved to him. The man immediately stepped back. Continue. Eliza leaned closer to the footage. The woman's hair matched hers. Her height matched. Even the cheap black coat was identical. But the timestamp in the corner showed 11:42. Eliza looked toward the elevator display across the hall. Pull the elevator cameras. Antonio brought them up. At 11:42, Eliza appeared on another screen carrying sandwiches onto the executive floor. Matteo glanced at her. 2 places at once. I can barely manage one. She studied both videos, searching for something wrong. Then she saw it. The archive footage showed a wall clock reading 11:38. 4 minutes behind the digital timestamp. The video was altered. Eliza tapped the screen. Someone changed the time code, but forgot the clock. Silence settled over the room. Matteo's attention shifted from the footage to her, and something in his gaze changed. Not trust. Not yet. Respect, perhaps. Antonio preserved both files. Quietly. Then he faced the security team. No one speaks about this outside the floor. The guards dispersed. Eliza exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. Am I still employed? Matteo stepped closer. You're still useful. That is almost kind. Don't become sentimental. By 8 on Tuesday evening, near the end of Eliza's second day, the executive floor had emptied except for Eliza, Matteo, Antonio, and the night staff. Eliza ordered soup, sandwiches, and enough coffee to keep everyone functional. When Matteo emerged from his office, his eyes landed on the bags. Another rule broken. Hungry people make mistakes. We established this. You established it. And yet you ate lunch. Antonio accepted a container with a solemn nod. She has evidence now. Matteo gave him a look that would have silenced anyone else. Antonio opened his soup. Hours later, Eliza fell asleep over a stack of access logs. Her cheek rested against a folder, one hand still holding a yellow highlighter. Matteo stopped beside her desk. In sleep, she looked younger, softer, nothing like the woman who had argued with armed men and found a flaw his entire security team had missed. He removed his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. Eliza shifted but did not wake. You're keeping her, Antonio murmured from the doorway. Matteo's jaw tightened. I'm keeping her visible. Of course. The next morning, Eliza woke to find the jacket around her and every remaining secretary interview canceled. Before she could decide what that meant, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. You will not survive your 7th day. The message appeared through an encrypted app Eliza had never installed. Before she could take a screenshot, the screen refreshed and the warning erased itself, leaving no conversation history behind. Matteo saw her face change from across the office. He crossed the room without hurry, which somehow made everyone move faster. What happened? Eliza held out the phone. Someone just promised I won't make it to day 7. His eyes hardened, and the warmth she had felt beneath his jacket the night before disappeared behind something colder. Antonio sealed the phone inside a signal-blocking pouch, while Matteo summoned security with 2 fingers. Within seconds, the floor locked down again. You'll have a driver, Matteo decided. 2 guards. Your calls will be monitored. Eliza folded her arms. No. The word landed harder than a shout. Matteo turned fully toward her. This is not a negotiation. Then you're protecting the wrong person. She stepped closer, refusing to let the men around them turn her fear into silence. Tell me who follows me. Tell me what they're allowed to do. Let me choose my route. But you do not get to take control of my life because someone threatened it. His jaw tightened. You don't understand the danger. And you don't understand that protection without consent is still a cage. It just has nicer furniture. For several seconds, the entire office waited for Matteo Ravello to crush the argument. Instead, he looked at her as if no one had ever placed a boundary in front of him and expected it to remain standing. One guard, he finally answered. You know his name. You approve the route. No monitoring private calls. Eliza's shoulders loosened slightly. And I keep my own phone. Antonio will secure it. That sounds suspiciously like a compromise. Don't become difficult. Too late. By 9 that night, Matteo's concession had already failed. A black sedan followed them from Midtown, staying 3 cars back through every turn. The guard beside Eliza reached for his radio. Matteo, seated across from her in the armored SUV, noticed first. His expression emptied. Down. He moved before she could argue, one arm guiding her below the window line while his body blocked the glass. The motion was controlled, not rough, but the weight of him close to her sent a sharp heat through the fear. Eliza felt his breath near her temple. Are you hurt? Only my dignity. Good. I can replace that. Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. Matteo's mouth almost curved before the sedan vanished behind a delivery truck. They lost it 2 blocks later. At Eliza's apartment, the lock hung crooked. Inside, nothing was stolen. Her laptop remained on the desk. Cash sat untouched in a kitchen drawer. Only one object had been placed in the center of the table, a photograph of Eliza asleep beneath Matteo's jacket. Matteo picked it up without changing expression, but the paper bent beneath his fingers. You're coming with me. Eliza looked at the broken door. I'm not sleeping in your room. You'll have your own. With a lock. His gaze met hers. From the inside. Only you keep the key. The Ravello estate was quieter than she expected, all stone floors, dark wood, and men who watched doorways instead of people. Eliza had barely crossed the entrance when a massive cane corso charged from the hall. 3 guards tensed. Matteo's command cut through the room. Brutus, stop. The dog ignored him completely, skidded to Eliza's feet, and dropped its enormous head onto her shoe. From the staircase, an elegant older woman laughed. At last, she announced, someone in this house has the good sense not to obey you. By breakfast on her 5th day, Brutus had abandoned 17 years of loyalty and chosen Eliza as his new owner. The massive dog followed her into the dining room, ignored Matteo's command to return to his bed, then settled across Eliza's feet like a 200-pound rug. Teresa Ravello watched from behind her coffee cup, clearly delighted. He has excellent instincts. Matteo unfolded the newspaper without looking up. He eats socks. Still better judgment than most men. Eliza hid a smile and reached for the toast. The Ravello breakfast table could have seated 20 people, but only 4 chairs were occupied, Teresa at one end, Matteo at the other, Antonio halfway between them, and Eliza in the seat Brutus had apparently selected. The silence lasted 30 seconds before she pushed back her chair. Does anyone want actual coffee? Matteo's eyes lifted. That is coffee. Eliza examined the tiny cup near his hand. That is an espresso having an identity crisis. The chef appeared in the doorway looking personally wounded. 10 minutes later, Eliza stood at the kitchen counter showing him how her mother had made coffee on difficult mornings, strong, sweet, and large enough to require both hands. Teresa joined her. Antonio watched with the solemn attention of a diplomatic observer. Matteo remained in the doorway, arms crossed, pretending he had not followed them. Your house is very quiet, Eliza noted. It's peaceful, Matteo corrected. It's 1 candle away from being a memorial. Antonio looked down quickly. Teresa did not bother hiding her laugh. By noon, Eliza had labeled 3 nearly identical sets of keys, convinced the staff to eat together, and discovered Brutus knew how to open Matteo's office door with his nose. She found him inside later, lying beneath the desk while Matteo reviewed contracts. You're corrupting my dog. He approached me first. He has poor impulse control. Eliza glanced at the untouched tray beside him. Apparently, that's contagious. You skipped lunch. Matteo leaned back, studying her with the patient irritation of a man and used to being monitored. You are not my physician. No. Physicians charge more to tell you the same thing. She moved the tray closer, caught her sleeve on the silver jam dish, and sent a streak of raspberry across Matteo's white cuff. The room went still. Eliza stared at the stain. I'm beginning to understand why your staff carries emergency supplies. She reached for a napkin, then stopped before touching him. May I? Matteo's gaze dropped to her hand. After a beat, he extended his wrist. Carefully, her fingers steadied the fabric while she wiped away the jam. The contact was innocent, but the air between them changed. Matteo watched the concentration in her face, the soft press of her thumb near his pulse. Eliza became suddenly aware of how close she stood. Teresa entered, took in the scene, and quietly backed out again. Eliza released him first. There. Your reputation survived. Barely. Later, she called Antonio a thundercloud in a tailored suit after he rejected her request for brighter office lamps. Matteo laughed. It lasted only a second. Low, surprised, almost unfamiliar, but everyone in the hallway froze. That night, Eliza passed Matteo's study and heard his voice through the partly open door. No one touches her. Close every route if necessary. Her breath caught. Then his tone lowered. And she cannot know. If she feels trapped, she'll leave. Eliza stepped back into the shadows, realizing the threat Matteo feared most was no longer the one outside his gates. It was the possibility that she might walk through them and never return. The first time Matteo Ravello forgot the room was watching him. Eliza was standing at the top of the staircase in a dark green dress she had bought with her own money. He had been speaking to Antonio about security routes. Then she appeared, and the sentence died halfway out of his mouth. Eliza descended carefully, one hand on the rail. There's something wrong, isn't there? Matteo's gaze moved from her face to the bare line of her shoulders, then returned to her eyes with visible effort. No. It was the least convincing lie Antonio had heard from him in 18 years. Eliza stopped on the final step. You look like someone just canceled Sicily. Teresa adjusted Eliza's necklace with a pleased smile. He is trying to remember how language works. Matteo offered his arm before his grandmother could continue. We're late. Your schedule says we have 12 minutes. Eliza slipped her hand through his arm. I repaired it. The charity gala occupied the top floor of a Fifth Avenue hotel, crowded with politicians, donors, and wealthy men who greeted Matteo with careful respect. Eliza came as his executive assistant, not his date, and reminded herself of that every time his hand settled lightly at the small of her back to guide her through the crowd. Canceling the appearance would have warned the traitor that Matteo had discovered the security breach. Instead, he had tripled the protection detail, changed their route twice, and kept Eliza within sight from the moment they entered. Halfway through the evening, a young investor named Caleb Hart approached Eliza and asked about her work. He was charming, harmless, and clearly interested. Matteo stood 20 feet away speaking with a senator while watching every second of the conversation. Antonio followed his gaze. You're bending the stem of your glass. Matteo loosened his fingers. I'm holding it. With considerable emotion, Caleb offered Eliza his hand when the orchestra shifted to a slower song. Before she could answer, Matteo appeared beside them. His expression remained perfectly courteous. Miss Monroe, I need you. Caleb glanced between them. For work. Matteo's eyes never left Eliza. Immediately, on the dance floor, she rested one hand on his shoulder. You interrupted a business conversation. He was not discussing business. Were you jealous? No, another terrible lie. Matteo's palm hovered near her waist. May I? The question softened something in her. Eliza nodded, and his hand settled against her, firm but careful. They moved slowly beneath the chandeliers. For once, Matteo did not scan the exits. He watched her. You're staring, she murmured. I'm assessing a security concern. The dress. The number of men looking at you in it. Eliza's smile deepened. That sounded jealous. It sounded observant. She missed a step, and Matteo caught her before anyone noticed. Their bodies aligned for one suspended second. His thumb moved once against her waist. Her breath changed. So did his. You're the only employee who has altered my schedule and survived, he murmured. I'm putting it on my resume. Outside on the balcony, the city noise faded. Matteo stood close enough that Eliza could feel the heat of him without being touched. His eyes dropped to her mouth, then rose again, waiting. Eliza leaned in slightly. Midnight passed while they stood beneath the balcony lights. Somewhere inside the ballroom, a clock chimed 12 times. Eliza Monroe had officially survived her first week with Matteo Ravello. Antonio opened the balcony door. I apologize. His face suggested he did not. This arrived for Miss Monroe. Inside the envelope was a photograph of Eliza's apartment, taken through the window. On the back, someone had written, Your secretary is opening doors you cannot close. Beneath it lay a printed appointment created from Eliza's account, with Matteo's most dangerous rival, scheduled for midnight. By midnight, every senior executive at Ravello Holdings knew someone had used Eliza's account to arrange a meeting with Matteo's most dangerous rival, and Matteo made it clear that anyone who called her a traitor without proof would leave the building without a job. The boardroom went silent. Vittorio Ravello, Matteo's polished older cousin and chief financial officer, leaned back in his chair. Her credentials were used. Her apartment was photographed. At some point, coincidence becomes negligence. Matteo's gaze settled on him, cold and steady. At some point, accusation becomes a mistake. Eliza sat beside Antonio, still wearing the green dress beneath Matteo's jacket. She should have felt exposed. Instead, Matteo's public trust steadied her more than any armed guard could. The appointment was created at 6:13, she noted, opening the access records. I was on the dance floor. Antonio raised one eyebrow. There were several witnesses. Matteo ignored the comment. Eliza traced the formatting on the appointment. The location was abbreviated, the guest name entered without punctuation, and the security notation placed in the wrong field. This wasn't created from my computer. It was copied from someone else's. Scheduling template. Vittorio's expression remained calm. That describes half the company. Then we narrow the half. For the next 4 hours, Eliza compared archived calendars while Matteo worked across from her. He removed his tie, rolled his sleeves, and silently moved a cup of coffee toward her before she could reach for it. Their fingers touched. Neither pulled away immediately. "Careful," he murmured. "You're developing manners. Don't spread it around." Near dawn, Eliza found 6 personnel files marked confidential. Each belonged to one of Matteo's former secretaries. She opened the first and frowned. "You didn't fire them." Matteo's hand stopped above the keyboard. One had been transferred to a law firm in Boston. Another received a senior position in Chicago. All 6 had been given higher salaries, relocation packages, and private security for 6 months. Eliza looked up. "You made them hate you, so they would leave." His silence answered first. Then Matteo closed the laptop. "Years ago, an assistant was threatened because she worked for me. After that, I kept people close only long enough to train them, then pushed them somewhere safer." Eliza felt the tenderness of the truth and the arrogance beneath it. "You frightened them and called it protection. They stayed alive. They also deserved a choice." Matteo's jaw tightened. Choice means little when someone has a weapon at your back. It means more than. The words struck deeper than anger could. Matteo looked away first. "You're right." The apology was quiet, almost unwilling, but Antonio heard it. His expression shifted with surprise. Eliza returned to the records and found a series of transfers from the Ravello Charitable Foundation, each approved with her electronic signature. "This is how they planned to frame me." Matteo moved behind her chair, one hand braced beside the screen. The money had been routed through shell accounts for months, but the audit trail had been altered after Eliza's arrival to make her appear responsible. Only 3 people could authorize that level of digital access: Matteo, Antonio, and Vittorio. Antonio opened the recovered files from the transmitter hidden inside. The Bronze Eagle. It had not merely recorded conversations. For 3 months, it had captured security procedures, spoken authorization phrases, and the exact moments Matteo discussed the people he trusted most. Whoever controlled it had learned how to imitate Ravello access from the inside. Antonio had been in Sicily during the first transfer. Matteo's identity required biometric confirmation. Eliza opened the administrative log. One name appeared beside the signature cloning permission: Vittorio Ravello. Before she could speak, Matteo's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or the next photograph will not be taken through a window." Vittorio's message remained on Matteo's screen for 3 seconds before Antonio secured the phone, but 3 seconds were enough to change the air in the library. Matteo stood motionless beside the desk, one hand resting against the wood, his face emptied of everything except control. Eliza had learned to fear that version of him more than anger. "You're leaving New York tonight." His voice carried the finality of a locked door. She closed the financial report in front of her. "No, this is no longer about your employment. It stopped being about my employment when someone stole my face." Matteo turned toward Antonio. "Prepare the plane." Eliza stepped between them. "Don't use him to end a conversation you don't want to have." His eyes darkened. "Vittorio knows where you live. He has access to my security system and enough money to make people disappear. Then help me understand the risk. Don't decide my life for me. I cannot work while wondering whether someone has put a weapon against your back." The confession came out harsher than he intended. Eliza rose from her chair, leaving only a few inches between them. "That fear belongs to you, Matteo. It cannot become an order for me." He looked down at her, the muscles in his jaw tightening. The most powerful man in the room had no answer because she had named the difference between love and possession before either of them dared call it love. "What do you want me to do?" His voice dropped. "Ask." The words softened the space between them. Matteo's hand flexed at his side, then went still. "Eliza, do you choose to stay?" She did not answer immediately. She wanted him to feel the weight of waiting for another person's decision. Then she nodded. "Yes, I'm staying because I choose to finish this. And because I trust you not to turn that choice into a cage." Something in his expression cracked. Not weakness, but relief too deep to hide. They returned to the files, working side by side as the night thinned toward morning. Matteo removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves. Eliza sat on the edge of the desk, comparing access logs while his shoulder brushed her knee whenever he reached for a folder. Each accidental touch lasted half a second too long. When they reached for the same document, his fingers closed over hers. Neither moved. "This is becoming distracting," she murmured. Matteo's gaze lowered to her mouth. "You started it." "I fell through a door." "Exactly. A smile touched her lips. The tension between them had survived threats, false evidence, and one ruined bronze eagle. It finally broke when Eliza lifted her hand to his wrist and pulled him closer. She kissed him first. Matteo froze for one heartbeat, then cupped her face with a restraint that felt more intimate than hunger. His mouth moved against hers slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When her breath caught, he stopped. "Do you want me to continue?" Eliza answered by drawing him back. The second kiss was deeper, warmer, still careful. Dawn pressed pale light against the windows before they separated. Eliza rested her forehead against his, smiling despite the danger waiting beyond the library. Then Antonio entered carrying a decrypted drive. His expression erased the moment. "We found the authorization trail." Matteo released Eliza and opened the file. Every hidden transaction led to one master authorization key. The digital certificate attached to it belonged to Antonio Greco. Matteo looked at Antonio's name on the screen, and the warmth left his face so completely that Eliza felt the room turn colder. For 18 years, Antonio had stood at Matteo's right hand, handled threats, protected the family, and carried secrets that could have destroyed half the city. Now every hidden transfer pointed to him. Antonio did not reach for the gun beneath his jacket. He simply placed the decrypted drive on the table and stepped back. "I didn't do it." Matteo's eyes remained on the screen. "Your authorization key was used 37 times. Then someone copied it. Only 3 people had access, and one of them wants us looking at each other instead of him." Matteo's hand closed around the edge of the desk. The old wood creaked beneath the pressure of his grip. Eliza saw the old instinct rise in him. The need to decide quickly, punish hard, and leave no room for betrayal to breathe. "Security," Matteo called toward the hall. 2 guards entered at once. "Take his weapon." Antonio removed it himself and placed it on the table. No protest, no anger. That frightened Eliza more than resistance would have. "Matteo." She stepped between them. His gaze snapped to her. "Move." "Not yet." "Eliza." Her name carried a warning. She held her ground. The first transaction happened on March 4th at 9:12 p.m. Antonio's face tightened with recognition. "We were in Palermo." Matteo turned slightly. Eliza pulled up the travel records. "You and Antonio were at a family memorial. No network access. No remote logins. There are photographs, security records, and 40 witnesses." One guard shifted uncertainly. Matteo's voice lowered. "That proves one transaction. Then look at the others." Eliza opened the file history. Every transfer happened when Antonio was physically beside Matteo, on flights, in meetings, inside rooms where outside devices were blocked. The evidence was not merely false. It was designed to look perfect. Too perfect. Vittorio didn't frame Antonio because he thought we'd believe it, Eliza realized. He framed him because he knew you'd react before checking. Matteo's jaw tightened. "You think I'm predictable. I think he knows which wound to press." Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that once made entire rooms afraid. This time, it belonged to a man facing the ugliest truth about himself. Matteo looked at Antonio. "I was prepared to condemn you." Antonio met his eyes without softness. "You were prepared to protect the family." "No," Matteo's voice roughened. "I was prepared to protect my pride." Then, in front of the guards and Eliza, Matteo Ravello did something no one in the room had ever heard him do. "I'm sorry." Antonio held his gaze for a long moment, then picked up his weapon. Apology accepted. Briefly, Eliza exhaled. Matteo turned to her, anger fading into something more vulnerable. "You stood in front of me when you knew what I could do. I knew what you wouldn't do. You trusted me that much? Enough to say no twice." Before he could answer, every screen in the library flashed black. Vittorio appeared on the largest monitor, seated inside the Ravello boardroom. "Touching," he murmured. "Unfortunately, while you repaired your friendship, I froze the company accounts, locked your security network, and sent federal investigators enough evidence to bury Ravello Holdings." A countdown appeared beneath his face. 12 hours. Vittorio smiled. "By sunset, Matteo, you'll lose your empire, your family name, and the woman who made you weak." The countdown reached 11 hours and 58 minutes when every door in Ravello Holdings locked at once. Elevators froze between floors. Security cameras turned toward Matteo's people, and the emergency system identified them as intruders inside their own building. Vittorio's voice came through the speakers. You always believed power meant controlling every exit. I simply learned from you. Matteo checked the handgun beneath his jacket, then looked at Eliza. You're leaving through the service tunnel. The evidence is in the basement server room. Antonio will retrieve it. Antonio doesn't know which files were altered. Matteo stepped closer, lowering his voice while alarms pulsed around them. This building is now controlled by a man who threatened to kill you. And sending me outside alone would make me safer? She held his gaze. Stop trying to remove me from the story every time it becomes dangerous. His expression tightened, but he did not issue another command. Instead, he extended his hand. Stay beside me. Eliza took it. That sounded almost reasonable. Antonio opened a maintenance panel behind the library shelves, revealing a narrow passage used for electrical access. They moved downward through concrete corridors while Vittorio sealed each route behind them. Halfway to the server level, armed security contractors appeared at the far end. Matteo pushed Eliza behind a reinforced corner as Antonio disabled the lights. The confrontation was brief, sharp, and controlled. Boots striking concrete, weapons knocked aside, men restrained rather than killed. Eliza covered her ears until silence returned. Matteo appeared from the darkness with blood at the corner of his lip. Her fingers touched his jaw before she could stop herself. Are you hurt? You should see the other man. That line was old before you were born. I was trying to reassure you. Try harder. His hand closed gently around her wrist, holding her there for one extra heartbeat before Antonio cleared his throat. The server room required a biometric scan that Vittorio had disabled. Eliza searched the wall panels while Matteo and Antonio argued over explosives. No one is blowing up the building, she warned. It was a controlled charge, Antonio replied. That is how men describe bad ideas before insurance companies become involved. She climbed onto a utility crate to reach the manual circuit box, caught her heel on a loose cable, and fell against a mislabeled metal panel. The cover broke loose, revealing an old mechanical fire release lever hidden behind it. Eliza stared at it for half a second, then pulled. Half the room went dark, and the server locks released with a heavy click. Antonio stared at the open server door. Did you just find the emergency release by falling into a wall? Eliza pushed hair from her face. I prefer the term full-body technical inspection. Even Matteo smiled, though it vanished when they accessed the master archive. The stolen funds, fabricated signatures, and recordings of Vittorio's orders were all there. Enough to clear Eliza. Enough to expose him. Then another folder opened. Eliza's relief died. It contained decades of Ravello transactions, bribery, illegal shipping routes, protected accounts, and payments tied to Matteo's father. Some records carried Matteo's authorization from the years before he moved the company fully into legitimate business. Antonio went still. We can remove those files and release only Vittorio's. Matteo stared at the two options on the screen. One would destroy his cousin while preserving the Ravello empire. The other would reveal everything, clear the innocent, and strip Matteo of the power his family had built through fear. Eliza did not tell him what to choose. She only stood beside him. If I release this, Matteo murmured, the man you met on your first day will no longer exist. Eliza looked at the countdown, then at the man who had finally learned to ask instead of command. Maybe that's exactly why you should release it. Matteo clicked upload with 37 minutes left on Vittorio's countdown. Antonio had contacted outside counsel hours earlier, and federal financial investigators were already waiting nearby for authenticated evidence. For one suspended second, nothing happened. Then decades of Ravello records began transferring to the investigators, company attorneys, and 3 independent news organizations Antonio trusted not to bury the truth. Matteo watched the progress bar move across the screen without blinking. He had survived bullets, betrayals, and men who wanted his name erased from Sicily. None of them had demanded as much courage as a single blue line reaching 100%. Once this finishes, there's no taking it back. Antonio stood beside the server rack, his voice quieter than usual. Matteo looked toward Eliza. That is the point. The upload completed. The evidence confirmed an investigation already underway, allowing federal attorneys to activate sealed warrants and emergency financial holds. The hidden foundation Vittorio had used to steal millions became the final link investigators needed. Federal agents entered the boardroom before the countdown reached 0. Vittorio attempted to leave through a private elevator, only to find Matteo's security team waiting, not with weapons raised, but with recorded orders, financial logs, and 2 investigators carrying handcuffs. Vittorio's final message reached Matteo minutes later. "You destroyed your own family." Matteo read it once, then deleted it. "No, I stopped protecting what was destroying us." The next 72 hours stripped Ravello Holdings down to its bones. Matteo surrendered documents, answered questions, and accepted responsibility for the operations he had authorized years earlier. His attorneys negotiated cooperation agreements for employees who had followed orders without knowing the full truth. Illegal divisions were closed. Legitimate companies were placed under outside supervision. Matteo accepted a deferred prosecution agreement, years of federal monitoring, permanent loss of several business licenses, and financial penalties that cost him nearly half his fortune. By Friday, he had also lost most of the influence men once crossed streets to avoid. Yet when Eliza found him asleep in a chair outside an interview room, his face looked younger than it had the day she fell through his conference room door. 3 weeks later, he returned to an office missing its private security wall, its locked archive, and most of its expensive furniture. The bronze eagle was gone. Eliza had replaced it with the small plant from her desk. "It survived," Matteo observed. "Barely." She adjusted one of its bent leaves. "It spent too much time around you." A faint smile touched his mouth, then disappeared beneath something more serious. "I used to think power meant making people stay." Eliza leaned against the edge of his desk. "And now?" Matteo moved closer, stopping before the space between them became a demand. "Now I think it means giving someone the freedom to leave, and becoming a man they might choose to return to." His hand rose, but he waited until Eliza placed her fingers in his. "I love you." There was no command in it. No promise to buy the world or destroy anyone who threatened her. Only a truth offered without armor. "You made me want a life I don't have to defend with fear." Eliza's eyes softened. "You built that life yourself." "I only kept pointing at the exits." Matteo lowered his forehead to hers. "You were very persistent." "It's on my resume." His quiet laugh warmed the empty office. Eliza kissed him once, slowly, then stepped back and placed her employee badge on the desk. Matteo looked down at it. "What is this?" "I love you too." Her voice remained steady despite the ache beneath it. "Which is why I can't keep working outside your door." For the first time since losing his empire, Matteo looked truly unprepared. Eliza turned toward the elevator, leaving him beside the plant she had taught him not to neglect. "Eliza." She paused, but did not look back. "Are you leaving me?" Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "No, Matteo. I'm asking whether you know how to love me when I'm no longer yours to employ." For 3 weeks, Matteo Ravello did not send flowers, buy Eliza's apartment, assign a driver to follow her, or appear at her new office pretending coincidence had brought him there. He did the one thing that cost him more than losing half his empire. He respected her decision. Eliza noticed anyway. No black SUV waited outside her building. No expensive gifts arrived with instructions disguised as kindness. Matteo called only once, on Sunday evening, to ask whether Brutus could visit because the dog had stopped eating properly. Eliza knew it was a terrible excuse. She also knew Matteo had asked instead of deciding, so she agreed. Brutus ate 2 bowls of food, occupied most of her couch, and returned home wearing a ridiculous blue bandana. Matteo sent one message afterward. "He looks compromised." Eliza smiled at the screen. "He looks happy." The answer came a minute later. "I'm learning the difference." On the 22nd night, someone knocked on her apartment door. Matteo stood in the hallway without guards, weapons, or the armor of a tailored suit. His dark coat was damp from the rain. In one hand, he carried the small plant from his office. In the other, he held the coffee mug she had abandoned on her last day. "You forgot these." Eliza glanced at the plant. "That belongs to you." It's leaning toward the elevator. It's trying to escape. A quiet laugh touched his mouth, but nervousness remained in his eyes. Matteo Ravello had faced federal investigators with less uncertainty. "May I come in?" Eliza stepped aside. He entered, placed the plant near the window, and refused coffee. When she offered it, "I won't be here long." From inside his coat, he removed a folder. Eliza's expression tightened. Please tell me that isn't another employment contract. It is. Matteo, he opened it before she could refuse. The folder contained the proposed structure for a rebuilt Ravello Foundation under an independent board. Eliza's position would be director of operations, with equal voting authority, a separate office, the power to challenge his decisions, and a salary to be approved by outside counsel. She read every page while Matteo waited in silence. You gave me veto power. You use the word no more effectively than anyone I've met. And if we disagree, we argue until one of us produces evidence or Antonio threatens to resign. Eliza fought a smile. You really thought this through. Matteo's gaze held hers. I had 3 weeks. She closed the folder. I have conditions. He nodded. No hesitation. No lies disguised as protection. No solving my problems with money unless I ask. And never call love ownership. Agreed. You answered too quickly. I decided before coming. Eliza studied him. You're still giving orders sometimes. I'm trying to recognize them before they leave my mouth. He stepped closer, then stopped an arm's length away. May I kiss you? The question carried more power than any command he had ever given. Eliza caught his tie and pulled him down. Approved. His mouth met hers slowly, one hand settling at her waist only after she leaned into him. The kiss deepened, warm and controlled, until the folder slid unnoticed from her fingers. Later, when morning light reached the windows, Matteo placed a second document on the table. Eliza narrowed her eyes. What now? He opened it to reveal architectural plans for a restored villa in Sicily. 2 offices faced the sea. They were the same size. Matteo watched her carefully. Not a contract. A possibility. Eliza traced the space marked with her name. Are you asking me to move in? His breath caught, but he did not look away. I'm asking whether you can imagine building something with me that neither of us has to escape. 1 year after Eliza Monroe fell through Matteo Ravello's conference room door, his new secretary celebrated his 365th day on the job by placing a chocolate cake in the staff lounge. His new assistant, Daniel Brooks, had never cried in the elevator or surrendered his badge before lunch. Ravello Holdings now operated under independent oversight. Every legal division remained profitable, and the executive floor had something it once considered impossible: open doors. Matteo was still capable of silencing a boardroom with one look, but he no longer used fear to prove he belonged at the head of the table. Employees took lunch breaks. Assistants questioned impossible schedules. Even Antonio had started leaving before midnight, though he described it as strategic recovery rather than rest. Eliza no longer sat outside Matteo's office. Her name appeared on the glass door across from his, beneath the title Director of Operations. When they disagreed, which happened often, Matteo listened before deciding. When he forgot, Eliza reminded him, usually in front of witnesses. The Ravello Foundation had funded shelters, legal clinics, and employment programs for families harmed by the empire Matteo's father had built. It did not erase the past. Matteo never pretended it could. It only proved that responsibility could become more than punishment when a person chose to keep doing better after the headlines disappeared. That summer, they returned to the restored villa in Sicily. The 2 offices still faced the sea, equal in size, though Eliza's held more books, 3 dying plants, and a drawer Matteo was forbidden to organize. Teresa invited half the village to dinner without warning. Antonio claimed he had not known about the string quartet in the garden. Brutus wore a white bow tie and looked deeply offended by it. Eliza realized something was happening when Matteo stood beneath the olive trees without his phone. He took her hands, and for once, the man who had negotiated with federal prosecutors and hostile boards seemed uncertain of every word. The first time you entered my life, you broke a door, a statue, and nearly my entire security system. Eliza smiled. I was nervous. You remained consistent. His thumb moved gently over her knuckles. You taught me that love is not keeping someone close enough that they cannot leave. It is building a life they are free to choose. Matteo lowered himself onto one knee. The garden went quiet. Even Brutus stopped pulling at his bow tie. Matteo opened the ring box, but his eyes never left hers. Eliza Monroe, will you continue choosing me? Her vision blurred, though her voice stayed steady. Yes, but I retain full authority over your calendar. Relief broke across his face before the laughter did. Agreed. She leaned down to kiss him, caught her heel on the stone, and nearly fell. Matteo rose fast enough to catch her against his chest. You always fall into my life. Eliza adjusted his collar, smiling against his mouth. At least I finally learned where I want to land. They married beneath the same olive trees 3 months later. Teresa took credit for everything. Antonio denied crying. Daniel reached day 400 without incident. And the small plant Eliza once placed on Matteo's forbidden desk grew large enough to need a new pot. People later claimed a clumsy girl had changed the most feared man in Sicily. But Eliza had never changed him by enduring his darkness or loving him hard enough to erase it. She gave him a choice. Matteo changed because he finally became brave enough to take it. Love did not save him from consequences. It taught him to become someone worth returning to.